Welcome to Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom podcast. My name is Mompoloki Lerumo Mogobe. Our objective is to enthuse, inspire, energize, and empower entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs of all stripes here in BW and beyond. We do so by inviting these entrepreneurs into our makeshift studio. Sometimes we call them to the restaurant, sometimes we go to our studio, and we ask them to share their experiential knowledge, their experiences and their expertise, and we ask them as many questions as we can, aimed at empowering you also as a viewer. Okay. Hello dear viewer, dear listener, my name is Mompoloki Lerumo Mogobe. Welcome to a great episode, another great episode of Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom podcast. Always an honor, a privilege. It's not something I take for granted, the ability to come and share with you entrepreneurial wisdom. It's always a privilege for me and an honor because I get to learn so much as you are learning. I meet these dynamic entrepreneurs from all walks of life, entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs of all stripes. And today I have a great entrepreneur for you. My guest is Tapiwa Anifasi. We're going to talk about issues of literacy, insofar as they affect entrepreneurship, and specifically we're going to talk about foundational literacy as a foundational human right. Have you ever thought of literacy as a human right? That's what our guest is going to talk about. Mr. Anifasi, welcome to the studio.
Good morning, sir, and it truly is a pleasure for me to be here, that finally a fan can actually be seated next to you and be able to share my own thoughts and experiences. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. Let's talk first about your background. Tell the viewer what you do professionally and what you're involved in.
Well, for me, I am into the education space, and in particular dealing with literacy. That's with an NGO named Spelling Bee Botswana, where I wear multiple hats in the organization itself. When you're in a non-profit, you always have to be switching here and there, but mostly I do public relations as well as program development in the organization. And I have been able to study in the course of my educational capacity to do international business. I have an honors international business degree as well as an events management business degree. And that led me now along the path of education as we were doing so many things. And then now I'm actually pursuing my master's in early childhood development. Okay. And in working with Spelling Bee, we've been since 2012. And I have been able to experience, literacy at the foundational level, especially with school kids from primary school all the way to senior school. And that made me fall in love with issues around literacy. I also am the current local chapter president for Junior Chamber International. That's the Gaborone chapter. And it's a privilege for me to be part of volunteerism. It's something that's been a part of my life, so I'm always excited about that.
That's how you and I bumped into each other, through Junior Chamber. Yes. I'm a patron, as you know.
Yes.
And it's an organization that I'm very proud of. But the viewer has no clue as to what organization this is. Can you take a bit of time to share the main objectives of the organization?
Definitely. Junior Chamber International is truly about development. We look at how we can help young people between the ages of 18 and 40. And this is to ensure that you are a holistic citizen. We want to build active citizens in our society, people who are solution oriented, who see a problem and say, we are going to do something about this. And through Junior Chamber International, we help you through developmental opportunities that exist for you to be able to become that sort of active citizen that we can look at and say, we are grateful to have such an individual in our country. And that is what we do through Junior Chamber International. So it's a reputable international organization. We have chapters that are here in Botswana itself, and here in Gaborone we have a very vibrant chapter that is pushing to ensure that we truly look at our community, especially now in an era of a pandemic that has really caused so many various challenges that many are struggling with. We should be able to provide solutions.
We're going to talk about literacy as a foundational human right. Can you please help the viewer understand the subject? why should we even think about literacy as a human right?
Oh, most definitely, definitely. I think it's always weird when people hear that foundational human right, literacy, because we always think of human rights as access to water, health, all of those things. But literacy in itself is a foundational human right. And it's not only coming from my mouth, these are echoes coming from UNESCO itself to say, no, we are now in a time frame where the concept of reading and writing should not be a privilege in terms of only a few people are able to read and write. Everybody should be able to read and write. However, what makes that interesting is that's a traditional definition of literacy. We were referring to reading and writing. When we now talk about literacy in accordance with the 21st century, it means that there are contextual framings that are happening culturally, socially, economically, politically, that have to make us then look at literacy and say, but what is expected of me as an individual? So it means we're expected to be able to read, to write, to listen, to speak. All of this means you're able to synthesize, to analyze, and to critique information. So that is now the scope of what literacy truly is.
Most of our viewers are entrepreneurs, aspiring and accomplished. Why should they even care about that?
I think it would be almost foolhardy to be an entrepreneur who doesn't understand these valuable aspects of synthesizing information. What do we mean by synthesizing information? Now, as an entrepreneur, you are exposed to a lot of information and sources of information. So you should have the capacity to grab different sources of information, and when you bring this information together, you synthesize it. Once you synthesize it, you're now able to analyze this information. As an entrepreneur, you should be able to realize that this information is not for me. This is for me, this one is not for me. And so that becomes important. And the critiquing of it is also to say, even the information I'm saying is for me, is it actually good enough for me? And this becomes very important. I remember I was telling a colleague that this is the reason why the epistemology of Africa, our literature, our books, our films, we struggle with it because we usually take anything that comes either from the West or from the East and say, this is right, and we must just adopt it.
It's a big word, epistemology.
Yes, which literally relates to our way of thinking, our way of doing things, our writing, and how we put all of this together in material that can be used to teach us going forward.
I suppose when we go deeper into the subject, we'll understand more.
Oh, definitely.
Literacy is a food of the soul. It feeds the soul. Perhaps you can take a bit of time to unpack that.
Oh, definitely. What I love about that is that when you have now begun to realize literacy beyond reading and writing, you begin to realize it's about you understanding things. You appreciating that, oh, Mr. Mogobe has a different perspective on a particular subject from me. And if I am feeling as if this perspective that I have is not energizing me, maybe Mr. Mogobe's perspective gives me the energy that I need. So I feed my soul, especially as an entrepreneur, by being able to appreciate, to identify, and to understand the different perspectives that exist. So I do not lose hope in my soul when one perspective has been crushed. I begin to realize that there are other perspectives that can stand the test of time. So that exposure to the differences of information becomes even more critical, and that's why these skills, these strong literacy skills, become extremely, extremely important.
Can you tie that with your organization, Spelling Bee? What is behind Spelling Bee, and how does it address this particular issue of feeding the soul?
All right, fantastic. I wish I had 2 days to be able to really go and dive into this, because it takes us now into the challenges that we're facing as a nation, especially in the 21st century. One of those particular challenges is the disparities, the literacy disparities that are caused, of course, by socio-economic statuses of different families and people. And what that effectively means is that we've got children who are in schools who are not able to be exposed to the same level of literacy that their peers are exposed to. So we have got less advantaged peers together with more advantaged peers in an environment where studies have shown that, for example, by the age of 3, it's very possible that one child could have a very strong vocabulary in comparison to another one. And so as Spelling Bee, we move around schools in the country from primary all the way to senior school, teaching them spelling because the foundation of literacy has got to start with spelling. Anything that you're going to be able to read or write, you must be able to spell. And so we through a spelling bee competition, we drive literacy forward. So we want there to be a clear appreciation of words. I always love to say that if you're not friends with words, you become enemies with words. And once you're enemies with words, you're enemies with information. And so we want young children, especially at a foundational level, to become friends with words early. We don't want it to be coming later, because it's difficult, Mr. Mogobe, to come to someone who is now 40 years old, 50 years old, and trying to take them through literacy. Life has dealt them too many cards, and they're trying to play the deck. But at a young foundational level like that, from primary school, we're able to help them set the right foundations, and so we're able to sort of like cover this literacy disparities that exist. A very important thing, Mr. Mogobe, about that is that if we were to talk about our nation's upward mobility, we've got to be able to speak about the literacy disparities. And if we are not doing anything to improve literacy at a young level, it means that your children or your children's children, that generational mobility, intergenerational mobility, it will not happen. Why? Because they are still struggling with literacy in the same way you did 20 years ago. But we can do something about it today.
I watched a movie, a Hollywood movie starring one of my favorite actors, Lawrence Fishburne, called Spelling Bee.
Aquila and the Bee.
Yeah, is there a connection? It's called Aquila and
the Bee.
And the Bee.
Yes.
Yes, I was riveted watching that movie. But is there a connection in terms of what that movie is about? Maybe some of the viewers have seen it.
Oh, most definitely. It is actually the inspiration behind Spelling Bee Botswana. What happened is that our president, she actually watched the movie when she was still in senior school. And she believed that maybe this could help us in senior school to improve our performance. And she started it as a club in school. And then after that, brought us together. Mr. Pangtibedi.
It's Pangtibedi.
Yes. And then she brought a team together and started knocking at different doors to get this project moving. And we were able to actually get support from the Ministry of Education back then, which is now the Ministry of Basic Education. And they told us to take it to the Northwest first, which is what we did. We took it to the Northwest first with 12 schools, and we started the competition. We saw some amazing results there. And now, 8 years later, we are talking about Spelling Bee in all 10 regions of the country, with over 220 schools participating, both public and private. We're talking about being co-founders of the African Spelling Bee competition with other nations, and we pioneered the first ever African Spelling Bee competition for students living with hearing and visual impairments. And in the coming week, we're going to be launching a book on spelling. And so we're truly excited about what Aquila and the Bee has inspired us to do. And that's the connection between the movements.
And in terms of across Africa involvement, these competitions, can you tell us about them?
Oh yes, most definitely. We came together with like minds about 5-6 years ago, and we said, look, let's come together, let's bring this competition together, let's give our children an opportunity to be able to see themselves with their peers. Now, our objective was not only for the competition's sake, but it was for the sake of exposing young students to say, look, it's not just through athletics or other means that you are able to represent your country. This is a testimony of one of our students who, it was their first time ever getting a passport, their first time ever getting on an aeroplane, and we took them to Uganda for the African Spelling Bee competitions. They were so excited, and they were crying, saying, I never thought I would ever represent my country in anything. And so that badge of honor to represent your country was also what they did is they select the top 10 in Africa to be able to represent Africa at the World Championships, and 2 of our students made it into the top 10 of Africa.
Wow.
And so if it wasn't for the pandemic last year, they were supposed to be in Washington DC representing Africa and carrying the flag of Africa. So this is what we do at a continental level. We come together, we bring the children together. We actually even make them interact with each other. They stay. You don't stay with a country mate. You stay with somebody from a different country. So at the end of the week, you should be knowing so much more about a different country. So it exposes, this is what literacy does. It exposes you to the world. Your ability to read, to write is now, we're physically showing it. It's possible to go to the next level.
That takes us to our next point, which is empowerment.
Oh yes.
You said empowerment, in the prep, we talked about how empowerment is a basis for, no, let me rephrase that.
Yes.
literacy as a source of empowerment.
Yes.
Can you please go deeper into that?
Oh, most definitely. Now, as I stated earlier on briefly, that there are now challenges that we're facing in the 21st century. There's demands, economic demands now in the 21st century that we have to deal with. And as I've given you that foundation to say, okay, we should be able to synthesize information, analyze and critique information. So which means that as an entrepreneur, you want to be empowered. You need to be able to have information, have access to the information, synthesize that information. Now, here we are in a situation where the finance minister comes out and he speaks about the budget. Now, that's a source of information that has come to you. Now, if we are not able to synthesize this information, analyze it, and critique it, you wouldn't be able to understand what is taxation. What does that mean that there's a sugar tax or this? What does it mean for you as a person? How am I empowered by a policy that has been put in place? Now, if you are not in a space where literacy is really the foundation of who you are, or you have those literacy skills, then you think it's a waste of time. And what do? You switch off the television as the minister is presenting the financial plan for the year. And so how will you be empowered by a policy you cannot synthesize, by a policy you cannot analyze, and a policy you cannot critique? And so
in fact, you avoid all the conversations about the budget speech. You have no interest.
And so you run away.
Yeah.
So there are many young people, young entrepreneurs who right now at this point don't even know what is going on in terms of economic policies that empower them to that capacity. Or there are those who have access to that information, but they don't understand the various perspectives then that they should be able to synthesize and analyze what works for them. So if you're in agriculture, you need to know what works for you in agriculture and not cry about what's working in ICT, so that you can be able to use what can work.
So what practically should entrepreneurs do? What can they do to empower themselves?
Right. Now this is where now we talk about, my work is at a foundational level, where I strongly believe that this is where we should have started from years back. The reason why I go back to that foundational level is
Primary
because
school, secondary school,
at ECD level, at literally early childhood level,
kindergarten.
At kindergarten level. That's what we're talking about, from 0 to 8 years old. That is a very critical age. Let me just give you an example so that you can understand how, as we answer that question, that what then should we do? You've got two children here. One, Mr. Mogobe, is exposed to YouTube, access to the internet, and the other one is not. So which means that automatically the ability to be able to read history, because they are watching DSTV's History Channel, becomes easier for them. Because at a young age they're already discussing, oh, I know what a world war is. And another child doesn't know what a world war is because of that exposure. Another one understands YouTube, how to use technology. So now as they grow like that without any interventions happening at that stage, you're not going to have a university student who is afraid of searching on the internet. It's complex, it's complicated. You're now having a student in secondary school who can't read science, who can't read history because it started at that age. So which means now we have to work about how do we help our young entrepreneurs get access to more information. Also, how do we teach them to synthesize, analyze, and critique the information that is coming their way? And we can only do that if we have things like community libraries, especially e-libraries. We have access to
What's an e-library? How does it look like?
What an e-library looks like is computers with connections to the internet, affordable connection to the internet, where we are saying, in as much as yes, there is internet penetration within Africa, but is there access to that use of internet by many young people? And so if data prices are expensive, for example, that means access is limited. So which means the access to information you can synthesize becomes also very limited. Then you start working by hearsay in the streets. And so someone will tell you, no, don't go and knock on that door. They will say no. But yet there is 100 podcasts online telling you that they knocked at that same door and they got a positive answer. And so this is where now we have to put a lot of emphasis in providing opportunities to access information.
Do we actually have e-libraries in existence already in Botswana?
I think if we were to look at them in comparison to the West, it's not the same structure, but we do have e-libraries in schools. We do have community libraries where, yes, there are some computers, but we could do better, most definitely. We have a library here in Gaborone that has access to the internet, which you can use. You can come in and plug in your computer, which then brings in another unintended consequence of access to internet, which is the purchasing of the technologies to use that now. Not only the data, but the computers themselves, the personal computers that I can be able to use to access that particular information.
Let's talk about literacy rates. and you say that it's important to target literacy rates in terms of bringing them up. How are we doing in Botswana? What is your assessment?
In Botswana, what I've been able to do as I'm pursuing my master's course is be invited to so many schools where I've been able to run tests, particular tests on what we call phonological awareness. This is word sounds. Phonological awareness. Because the more aware...
I'm learning big words from you.
The more you are aware about word sounds, the easier it is for you to bring sounds together and be able to understand words. So I run those sort of tests, word reading fluency, all of those sort of tests. Letter recognition, just simple letter recognition, that do you know what a J looks like, what a T looks like. So you would find that in the schools, I think I've been able to carry out tests in over 35 schools across the country, and I've been able to see what's actually fundamentally interesting here, Mr. Mogobe, is that the greatest challenges I've seen is in the urban areas. It's ironical. It's so ironic.
Are you saying literacy rates are lower in urban areas?
Definitely in urban areas.
On average.
On average. And we've actually even seen it in our competition itself, where our winners are coming from the northwest, in villages, students coming from villages, and they are competing against the ones in the urban areas, and the ones in the urban areas are struggling with spellings of words such as anchor, and you are hearing strange things for spellings that you would expect them in the urban areas, who you expect to have access to more information and more resources, are struggling with that. But we cannot say we are not doing well. I think the social welfare policy has allowed for so many students to have access to education, to what we call the teaching literacy practice. And it gets us into another conversation when we get there. So we are doing
Because
well.
I don't know what that means.
What we mean is that there are practices to literacy. One is teaching, the other is learning, the other is use. Now, to make us understand this thing, we have a child, you've taken your child to school, the teacher has to be able to teach the literacy practices. The learner has to be able to learn and then use them. So now we have a situation where there's a child and we say something is wrong with this child. This child can't read, this child can't write, and something is wrong. So we now say it's the child, it's the child, it's the child. But yet we are forgetting that the child is coming from a different cultural background, where the teaching instruction from home is different from what you are now doing in a formal setting in the classroom. So the child is struggling with the teaching practice, not with the learning practice. So when they go home, they're able to learn from their parents, learn from their peers, but when they come to the teacher
Where is that subtle difference? Teaching versus learning.
Teaching
practice.
versus, yes. Teaching is more on the output end, where the teacher is bringing to the table.
Imparting the knowledge.
Learning is more about input, where the child is taking it. So now if the teaching practice is wrong and it's not okay, or if the teacher themselves don't have strong literacy skills to be able to analyze the information they're getting, that this child is struggling with reading, but that one is strong in reading. What is happening? How can I synthesize, analyze this information so I can do good by this particular child? Then we have a serious problem.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, let's talk solutions. I mean, in terms of Botswana, do we have numbers in terms of literacy rates? And are there strategies in place for raising those literacy rates?
Yes. Let me start with saying that our literacy rates, we are very privileged because of social welfare programs that have really pushed our literacy rates from 30 years ago to this point where you're looking at 30 years ago, you're looking at below 30% literacy rates, to the point where now we are seated and we are saying Botswana is well above 70% in terms of literacy rates. And literacy in the traditional perspective, as I am saying, to say reading and writing, that's where we are. But now in terms of strong skills, this is where the studies still have to be carried out, but obviously from the sentiments and the perspectives that are coming out from industry that's complaining about graduates, that they are not ready for the industry and so forth, it shows us that the comprehensive array of literacy skills, we need to work on that. That is very, very crucial. Strategies have been put in place in terms of the programs, the reading programs, and unfortunately it is not as varied as we think, because the private schools are doing as much as possible to use different learning models. That we talk about the Montessori schools, you know, where we've got things like project-based learning that happens in other different private schools. So we have a mixture.
I think we have a few of those in Botswana.
Yes, we do.
What is so exceptional about these Montessori schools?
Yes.
What is the distinguishing factor about them?
Okay. Well, what is distinguishing about them is that they are a model that are designed they are more student-centric than teacher-centric. Meaning that it's the child that determines the rate of learning. And so what you do is that, for example, I can bring an assortment of toys in front of a child, And how we plan for the child's learning and development is based on the child's interest, what the child is picking, what the child is interested in, and we direct our teaching along the lines of the child's particular interests. So it's really a model that is centered on the child's interest, and so the energy, the zeal is from the child and not from the teacher. And so the teacher plays along with that. And so when you have a situation like that, Mr. Ko, anytime any person is interested in something, you don't have to work hard to motivate them to do that particular thing. And so that's the unique thing about our Montessori schools.
Okay.
Yes.
Sparks of life are spelt out. That seems to be self-explanatory, but I'd really love for you to dig deeper into that. Sparks of life are spelt out.
Definitely. So there's a rule that we have in the spelling bee competition where we say you are not allowed to spell a word saying double M, double T, double T. So for a word like committee, you can't come and say C-O-double-M. Why? Because every letter deserves the respect it is supposed to have.
Then you say double T and then double E at the end.
But you're supposed to say M, M, T, T, E, E. What that then effectively teaches you is that everything must be spelled out. It must be detailed. There's a detail to everything. And when you are able to spell out things, there's a spark that comes because you've got an understanding of every single detail. And that is a wonderful thing to have in life, to be able to understand. And this is why when you say the sparks of life are spelled out, you start spelling it out. And that's why it's a spark, because it's a singular
such a
spark.
refreshing thing to say, because some of us tend to talk very slowly, trying to pronounce every word. But in these days we live in, people want to talk fast,
Exactly.
with an accent, sort of rambling on. So it's so refreshing to hear you say, look, your emphasis in terms of our approach as spelling bee is to pronounce every single letter and give it importance. But still, you need to explain why you say sparks of life. How does life spark in when you spell individual words?
So now the foundation of words is the letter. You cannot form words without the letters. The same thing in our lives. There are certain things you need in your life, whatever you vocation decide to get into, whatever you decide to do in life. There are certain elements, singular elements that you have to take acknowledgement of in that life, and these elements are what make your life what it is. And so they should be like sparks, and you have to spell them out. And so it's almost as if you've developed the habit of spelling things out when you learn to give singular letters the respect they deserve. So you begin to understand that, for me to get, for example, to become a good lawyer, I have to start with doing well in my academics. But what is my academics? It's divided into years of study, divided into modules, divided into assignments, into tests, divided into study hours. So you start spelling out these sparks, and you start seeing the energy and your life moving in a particular direction. That's what we're referring to when we say the sparks of life. For entrepreneurs, there are stages to entrepreneurship. You do not wake up and suddenly you are at the top of the game. You start off with knocking on a door to make a sale. Actually, way before that, making the plan for the business itself, seeking out the resources, knocking at the doors, getting the clients, servicing the clients, getting a team together, employing the right people, budgeting, knowing how to use your money, dealing with disappointments and challenges, and then you keep growing and moving forward. So those are the sparks.
I wonder whether in your experience you are able to give instances and examples of children or kids who you actually transformed through this spelling bee process. Are you able to give specifics, even if you don't mention names?
Okay, yes, definitely.
Instances, yeah.
Definitely. So one of the things that we're so grateful for is that our students, when they come into spelling bee, it's not just about the competition. You also learn a lot of things, especially the reason why it's oral competition is it's for you to gain confidence to speak in front of people. So we deliberately have our competitions in front of an audience of your peers and others, so that you can have the confidence to stand and say something, in front of people. And deliver. So they gain a lot of confidence. So we had one student from the Northwest. This student was a bully in the school, and they didn't really want to do much except they were bullying people. And so they joined the spelling bee as, I'm just joining, finding out what this is. And when they joined, they started participating. They got excited about the competition, started participating extensively. They did very well in the competition. They didn't really necessarily win, but that same student went back and became an ambassador of spelling bee in the school, recruiting others, and eventually became a prefect because they became so responsible just from joining spelling bee. That's an example of one of them. Then we have others who
obviously stopped bullying.
Yeah, he stopped bullying. I mean, for you to then become a prefect, to be considered for that, he had ultimately changed his behavior. And this also stems from when we're having the competitions, let's say, because we usually host them in different regions every year because we want our children to experience their own country. So we would have our national competitions in a different region every year. That's what we do. So when they go there, they get to be able to interact with others. And so we take so much insistence on your uniform discipline, how you talk to others, how you dress. And so there's discipline that's instilled in the competition and they grow from that. Now for many others, now it's academic performance, where the majority, I think 95% of all our students have been top achievers. 95% of those who have been participating have been top achievers. You know, from Hansi, you know, senior secondary, we've had very beautiful top achievers. Year in, yet our national champion, with a young man who had been dominating the competition, and he had become a top achiever since then. And I think I would also take special mention for parents who have benefited from spelling bee. We had a child here in Gaborone at a school. They won the competition at their category in primary school, and their school gave them a scholarship.
Wow!
And the parents didn't have to pay fees for that particular year because the child did so extremely well in spelling bee. And these are some of the things that we see, not just changes for the student but for the family.
So it means that you're in partnership with what? With international organizations?
Yes, we partner with various organizations, local organizations. First, we have a lot of local organizations that have been supporting our work.
Which offer scholarships?
No, that's the school itself. It wasn't an organization. It was the school that decided that because of the child has put us on the map, then the parents don't have to pay fees. So it wasn't like an international organization. But at the international competition, like the continental competition, we have a scholarship from Monash University, where the winners get to be able to attend Monash University.
Okay.
And so that's one of the
this one is a big one.
Yes.
Literacy is freedom. People never think in those terms, but I'm sure you're about to educate us. Literacy is freedom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me put it this way. When you do not have access to information, it means that you are put in a particular box. Someone can hold you down because you don't have access to information. And also still you can have access to information. But the failure to be able to synthesize this information means that you can be locked in. The failure to be able to analyze information means that you can be trapped within a box. But now when you're able to do that, Mr. Mogobe, you're able to realize that in as much as the economic performance in our country is difficult, but if I am able to understand what Mr. Mogobe shared 2 years ago about how to, work around difficult situations and challenges in difficult markets, then I can be able to become free as an entrepreneur to try new things. Technology has come, but if you don't understand how technology can be used in this era where face-to-face contact has been reduced significantly, then that means that you are not going to be free to sell your products, to market yourself, to ensure that your name is known. So literacy puts you in a position now where you're free to engage, where you're free to think, where you're free to perform. And that's the use part now of literacy, where you're now free to use that information that you have acquired, analyzed, and critiqued. And then you can actually succeed and do well.
That's good. There used to be a slanderous statement that was said in the old days. I want to provoke you a little bit to comment on it, that if you want to hide something from a black man, you put it in a book. As a man who's steeped in literacy, is there any basis for this slanderous, if you call it, maybe you can call it just an old colonial statement?
Yes.
Yeah,
let me say that there was a basis to it then when we were still being denied access to the best educational facilities and educational programs. That's literally, many young people don't know about that. But our fathers would tell us how there was segregation of which schools you could go to, the extent of what you could learn. All of these things happened in the past. And so that meant that they would hide things in books that we would never have access to. But now, as information has become more open to us, we're beginning to realize that it's not only the black man, it's everyone. If you hide anything, because people are not reading anymore. Hence the synthesizing of information. People are just, they hear it, hearsay. This is what makes certain social media platforms very, very wild with activity, because they just take what someone has posted in 100 and maybe 100 characters and say, it's the truth. That's how it is. But then they don't go out to search out, okay, what journals exist? What books exist? What podcasts are there about this particular sort of information that I can synthesize it and assess the credibility of this information. So it's everyone, because we are hearing strange things coming from those we thought were supposed to be smarter than us, the black people. We are hearing the strangest of things, and we are questioning the credibility of most of them. And that's the beauty about science. Like, literacy is a science. You know, the ability to question what has been put before you.
You exist in the confines of literacy. Before you answer this one, I had a very beautiful experience recently around the inauguration of Joe Biden.
Okay. Yes.
There was a young lady by the name of Amanda Gorman who delivered a poem called The Hill You'd Climb. That's a 6-minute poem, or less than 6 minutes. In that poem, she just says a few beautiful words. And when I watched that poem and I read that poem, there's something remarkably uplifting, something so inspirational, so powerful that moved me. And when you're talking about literacy and the power of words, and I'm just thinking to myself, how does this situation apply to what you're talking about? Did you have a similar experience?
Yes. I think a lot of people watched that inauguration. Well, I'm hoping a lot of people did. And she really delivered articulately that poem. And it becomes important to realize that we are literally inspired by words. We are moved by words. It's everything we do from young children. Don't do that. Do that. You can be. You can do. And those words impact on us. And if someone calls you a fool, someone calls you stupid, it impacts on you. Someone says you are able, it impacts on you. So automatically, that means now when we come to that statement of you are the literacy, you're in the confines, you exist within the confines of literacy, it's identity. Who are you? Do you know who you are? Based on the information that has come to you. So if the information that has come to you is limited, it means that is going to be the scope of your identity. So you are seated there, you've registered your business, you've started your business, and you don't know you're an entrepreneur. You say you're just a trader.
Big difference.
Big difference. But now that matters because it's the information that has come to you. And have you been able to synthesize that information to the point now that you realize, but wait a minute, I am an entrepreneur. I'm able to knock on doors, get rejections, have new iterations of my product or service, and come back, knock, get a yes here and there, continue growing. I've now employed people. It's all about that literacy, that being exposed to that information, being able now to analyze it and realize that, I've now added one element to what makes an entrepreneur. I've added another element in the past 6 months. I've added another element. So I'm a budding entrepreneur as it is. And that's where now they're existing within the confines of literacy. What you do not know holds you back and defines you. What you know, what you've been able to synthesize and use now effectively, then you've changed your identity. This is why we take children and say, you can become a doctor. How do you become the doctor? By being exposed to information, and then you're able to now use that information. Now we call you doctor.
All right, no, that you explained that very well. No gift ever trumps literacy.
Yes.
No gift. I think here you are talking about the impression that, somehow children who are from wealthier families have an advantage. What you are basically saying is that no. The real advantage is literacy. Because there's no use if you inherit all that wealth and you don't have the brains to apply it. You're not literate enough to apply it. It's meaningless.
Exactly. You've literally put it so well, to say that, yes, you've been, and we've seen examples of that. Many children who've been left with great wealth, great opportunities, great resources. And then in a space of a year, we are now shocked. What happened here? I mean, this thing took 30 years to build, and in a year, everything is gone. And it's literacy. It's that ability to analyze and critique. What have I been given? What made it work? What got it to where it is? How can I take it to the next level? That is the real advantage, which means that for those who are termed the less advantaged children, you might not have internet at home. We'll give you the example of you are at the kettle post. There is something about animals that you can still learn, that you can be taught. So you can synthesize information about animals, how they drink, how they behave in certain weather patterns, how they are when they are not well, and that ability can actually take you to become an animal scientist. Why? Because you had literacy at that level in the cattle post. So there's a narrative that has been depicted that because you have access to certain resources automatically, you have the necessary strong literacy skills to take advantage of it, when that is actually not the case. Which, like I said, Elon, has been exemplified in our spelling bee competition. That you have children in areas where you are saying, no, these are the less advantaged areas, performing better than those in the so-called advantaged areas.
Still on this point, maybe you can help me understand this. We have audio books these days, but I find that audio books are not half as impactful as literal books. I can pick up something from an audio book and then take that book and read it cover to cover. The impact is different. Is there anything behind that?
Oh yes, definitely there is. It's what we call active connection. You know, what we call literacy interactions. How we interact with literacy, you know, information and conduits of literacy. What we mean is that, where do you get information from? The radio or physically? Now, with us as human beings, we are very physical beings. And so when I touch a book, I feel like I'm interacting more with it than I am when I'm hearing a voice, because now there are certain other elements. Do I like that voice that I'm hearing? You know, do I like the accent of that voice? And also, what language is being used in that audiobook? Is it my first language? Is it my second language? Do I like that language? Or I have complications with that language already. Remember the cultural backgrounds we're talking about? So if my first language is Setswana, and then now I'm having an audiobook that is in English, yet all my audio conversations are mostly in Setswana, I'm not going to be comfortable with the English audiobook. Why? Because my cultural habit has been audio in Setswana. I'm used to that.
And yet when I read a book, which is still in English, somehow it appeals to me better.
Now the physical interaction now supersedes the audio. This is why you can sit in the same room with a loved one, not even have to speak, and just hold hands, and volumes have been spoken.
Now you've answered it well. You've explained it nicely. The book is not as vital as the love of reading. I think you've spoken to that, but I think you can elaborate a bit more.
Now this stems from, you know, our journeys traveling around the country and seeing libraries with books that are in pristine condition. Pristine, meaning that the pages have not been flipped, but the books are there. So what does it help to have books in pristine condition, but they've not been opened? So there must be a love.
You're happier with books that are in a bit of a rough condition.
Because that shows use. Now, it shows that someone came and actively was searching for information. And so therefore the expectation is that they got information, they are going to analyze it, critique it. And we expect that if they've read the book, then maybe they've seen shortcomings in the book. Then they're able to write now a book to augment what has been missing in this one. But if the books are in pristine condition, and so we keep on buying the books, we put them on our shelf, they look amazing on shelves. Books really look amazing. They give a nice aesthetic, especially even in the home. But if you are not opening, if you don't have the love to actually engage with them, then it defeats the whole purpose.
Do you find that there's such a problem in the books that are in the schools that you've been visiting?
Oh yes. When you ask the librarians, they will tell you that the rate of borrowing of books is quite low in comparison to the population of students that are there. You go to university itself, there are some students who finished university, never enter the library.
They take everything from the internet.
They take everything from the internet, and that's where copy and paste comes from. From a failure to synthesize the sources, meaning to understand that there's a journal that can give me information, there's a book that can give me information, and not only a book in my field. I'm sure in law you'd be able to attest that it's not, you don't only read law books. Sometimes you have to delve into biology to understand what is happening here, and then you synthesize that information.
And how is your organization really helping in that regard, changing that mindset?
What we do as part of the competition is that in the schools there are spelling bee competitions they have in a class. And so what we do is we select a book, for example this year, and we say we are reading Things Fall Apart, for example. Then we say Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. Then we say that the words for the competition are going to come from the book itself. So now the students are going around reading Things Fall Apart, or we liaise with the teachers and find out what are the set books that are important for you this academic year. And then they tell us, and we use those set books as part of the year's competition. And so the students are going around reading the book. And also we partner as well with local authors such as Said Imdala, who gives us books that we give to our students, and then they read as well, and it empowers them. So there is no point in being able to spell words that you cannot see them used in context. So we want you to get the foundation right, spell, then from there, learn to write, to use them. Teachers are always telling us that, wow, their students have improved in their competent writing. They are no more writing WY for Y. They are now writing in full. And it's nice as a teacher to mark, a script that's written in full. And this is important because many of our students are really brilliant, Mr. Mogobe. But now they've been learned to write shorthand, especially in our urban area. They write in shorthand. They write like they're sending text messages. Exactly, even in the final examinations. Now, unfortunately, it's not your teacher who's marking your script, who knows you. It's someone else, maybe from a different region, and they do not appreciate that butchery of the English language. And I mentioned earlier Amanda Gorman. Is there anything you guys are doing to try and promote poetry? Oh, yes. We actually have a program that involves not just poetry, but writing. We have a partner called Baton Books, a young entrepreneur who's a publishing company. Baton Books, they're a publishing company. And what we do is that we run writing competitions. So what we want is the children to write scripts, want them to write poetry, and our hope is that we'll be able to publish these texts as the works of students. We want them to come out after 12 years of school that I have contributed to literary works in the country. Because no one says that you must only be so and so for you to contribute to the literary texts in the country. So that's exactly what we're doing, and we're working together with them, developing that sort of course and that program. Yeah, as I said, our audience are entrepreneurs. How do you believe the entrepreneurial community can be part of this effort? How can they help? How can they contribute? Another experience that we have, Mr. Mogobe, is when we go and we meet people, we challenge them to spell a word. That's what we do. It doesn't matter where we go, whatever office we go to, we challenge them to spell a word. And we give them the everyday words: committee, reservoir, the ones that we use every day. Not the big ones that we see in the movie. Reservoir is big. But I'm just kidding. We give them those everyday words because that's the language we use every day. We expect you to know accommodation. And it has been amazing how the failure to spell accommodation is immense, from the highest of offices to the lowest of offices. And we are saying that don't underestimate that. I do not know if you've traveled and seen on signs where there's the wrong spelling of a word, and you're like, whoo. Yeah, this is shocking. Good, yeah. I mean, this is supposed to be a reputable business. Accommodation is one word that exactly, and the spelling is wrong. And some people, they take that as a lack of seriousness about your business. And we try to say to local businesses, no, when you come together with us, yes, we are working with the young children, but your involvement in there makes you actually realize what you have been missing, because many skip these foundational stages and process, and they wish they could have gone through those steps. And so the community must actively make sure they work around spelling. So it's even an exciting exercise to have at a workplace, to have spelling bee competitions in the workplace. It excites, motivates people, and it's fun, to do such things. Okay. Now, it's a life of literacy. It's a life of literacy advantages. What do you mean by that? Now, I'm sure we've given a very good background to what literacy is. And we've spoken about the 21st century demands from socio-economic and cultural perspectives. Now, we must never be ignorant to the fact that as a nation, we are competing against other nations for limited resources. And it means that we are trying to get a particular spot that can push us to have an economic advantage. So that which we call comparative advantages now, literacy grants us the opportunity to have the comparative advantages. If we have a nation, let's say an electorate, that doesn't understand what we're talking about, the economic implications of policies and so forth, we would sit back and say, we never understood that. We didn't know how to apply to us. Now, we have another nation next door that understands fully the implications of the policies they are putting in place, that supports those policies that they are putting in place, and they take advantage of them. Automatically, they rise above others. I always like to give the examples of countries such as Singapore and China. They were not what they are now. I was laughing, someone said, at a point, Japan was literally colonizing China. But now they are not in the same stratosphere. They are different. Why? Because there was a synthesizing of information and analyzing, critiquing that says, no, we must do what works for us. And they pushed it. And now when we look at them, we marvel. But everything that they have done, we can still do.
To know how an adult thinks is to realize what the child read.
Yes. This is to connect with what the work that I'm doing, especially in early childhood development, to say that sometimes we look at an adult and we think that the issue started there, at that age. You're looking at an employee, for example, as an employer, and you're saying, this person can't write simple letters. It didn't start there. It started as to what did the child read at ECD level. Now, that is a statement that is supposed to say, let us never ever underestimate the value of what is happening at early childhood development stages. When you find your child holding a book, try to help them. Because they will grow up to be an adult who can't read, an adult who can synthesize information, an adult who is working. Now, you can imagine now you are in an office with employees who can synthesize, analyze, and critique information. So, Mr. Mogobe is not available in the office for that week or for that month, dealing with various issues. Now, you're expecting the employees to be able to understand what needs to happen, what needs to carry forth. Now, their
Most
failure
of it
to
is common sense.
It's common sense.
You think it's common
sense,
but it's not so
but
common.
It's not. But it didn't start there. It is a foundation. And so now we're trying to solve the results, what were the fruits, what we're seeing now, right, in the office. And we're trying to bring solutions that only affect here, not realizing that there's a foundation that we actually have to deal with. It's like a farmer. You see that the fruit trees have not grown, then you say, just cut down the tree. But you don't realize that there's a problem in the soil. The nutrition of the soil is not okay. You know, let's work with the soil first before we start blaming the trees and say mango trees don't grow here. You know, so that is what that phrase is supposed to mean, that there's a foundation, especially with early childhood, that then leads to people becoming relevant, important, articulate, strong adults with strong literacy skills.
Wow. This is a part of the show where you get to ask me any question you wish to ask me, sir.
Yes. I think I've been thinking about this, that if I ever get the opportunity to ask you a question, I think the one question that I would ask is, when was there ever a time that you struggled with reading? And when you found yourself in that situation, what pushed you to say, I have got to learn how to do this, or I've got to do this?
Not particularly. I always seem to have loved reading early. There was a book called The Student Companion, which I fell in love with when I was in primary school. So I used to like reading and memorizing big words. For instance, I used to pride myself in knowing the two of the longest words in the English language. One was, I don't know if I'll get this right, is supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. They have a movie in Hollywood by that name. And the second longest word was anti-disestablishmentarianism. And I used to like talking those words. And I was obsessed with reading James Hadley Chase, and also reading a lot of novels like that. Robert Ludlum comes to mind, and there were other powerful authors. So I've always been a devourer of information, and I still do. I mean, like last year I had I challenged myself to read one biography or autobiography a week, and I managed to push that for some months. So I still love reading. I've been giving audiobooks a shot, but like I was mentioned to you earlier, they're not as exciting as actual books. So I think I'll probably go back to my physical books as well. But I love reading, and it's something that I love to the point where I'm now encouraging my children and even bribing them ethically to read, because I everything you've said, I'm 100% on board.
Wow, that is amazing. I'm glad you mentioned that, the Student's Companion. It's also one of those that we grew up with. It had a lot of information in it. It really had sources of information that now, when you synthesize it works for you. I'm really excited, and I'm excited to hear you say that you are now also bribing your children ethically to be able to read.
I love reading. And my sister got hold of an encyclopedia called Encyclopedia Britannica, and she paid through her nose, and those guys kept hounding after her because she couldn't quite finish paying them off. But I love that set. I still have it in my office today. This was long before the internet. I'm talking 80s and 90s, even 70s, when I was little. So I always liked digging into those encyclopedias. And so you really touched a soft spot for me in terms of a real love. Reading is a real love for me.
Oh.
Okay. Now, you can look at that camera. I think it's that one.
Yes.
And give them a party message. Maybe a summary of what we discussed, but more importantly, something inspirational, something powerful, something that they can take home.
Most definitely. Yes. One of the most important things that we have got to appreciate in this life is the access to information that we have now. And as we have explained today here, is literacy is beyond reading and writing. It goes into your ability to bring together all this information, understand it, analyze it, see the loopholes and the shortcomings, because all the knowledge in the world has not yet been captured within all sources of information. And there are things that you would be able to see within that information that can help you and many others go forward in life. And so I would want to encourage you that fall in love with reading, fall in love with writing, and don't stop there. With whatever endeavor that you have, get the necessary information, look at it. What works for you? What is good for you? Analyze it. Throw away that which is not good for you. Fix, add on to that which you think is lacking, so you can add to the body of knowledge in this life. And I guarantee you that the more that we do that, the more solutions begin to appear in our lives. And as entrepreneurs as well, the more we're able to see the gaps that exist in various industries for us not only to create new opportunities, but to also answer the problems of our nations. Our solutions to our national problems, our communal problems, our family problems lie within the scope of literacy. Let's get reading, writing, analyzing, synthesizing, and critiquing.
Thank you very much. You've been a great guest, Mr. Tapiwa Anifasi. Thank you very much. You've done a great job. Pass my regards to your dad, who happens to be my tenant, or an old tenant of mine.
Yes.
So he happens to be a doctor as well. Now, can you let them know where they can reach you if they want to carry on with this conversation and take this things further?
Oh, most definitely. You can reach for us on social media platforms. You can search for Spelling Bee Botswana. You'll find us on those particular platforms, as well as JCI Gaborone. You would find us on those platforms. And personally, of course, you'd find me at Brian Anifasi. That's Brian with a Y, Bryan Anifasi, on various social media platforms. You just search the name, you'll find me there, and we can take it forward. And I believe you should have no problems. Don't hesitate to contact me on 74317357. I would be available to sit down with you, discuss the intricacies of literacy, maybe even read a book or two together.
Tell them about JCI. Where do they reach for JCI?
For JCI as well, just JCI Gaborone. That is our Facebook page. You can get us on JCI Gaborone, or just JCI Botswana itself. You would find all the links necessary to connect with us there. And even on the same number, you can get a hold of me, 74317357. We're definitely looking for members who are all about impact in this nation and taking this city in particular to the next level. And volunteers are always welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Cheers.